So, hello and welcome, Scott.
Thanks.
Could you say 2 words about who is Scott Miller?
I am a psychologist who has, for most of my career, been very fortunate that people will listen to my journey to figure out how to deliver effective mental health services.
Okay. And what we are here to talk about is fit. And what is fit?
Fit is feedback-informed treatment, and that particular name came about in around 2009. It's recognized in this country and in many countries as an evidence-based practice because we have many randomized controlled trials which show that when clinicians monitor the client's experience of the relationship and their progress and respond in particular to issues or concerns or a lack of progress, that retention in treatment improves and outcomes, especially among those at risk for a negative or null outcome, also improve.
That is truly amazing. So why ain't we more people using it?
Well, we just went through a pandemic, and one of the suggestions, at least in my country, was to engage in regular hand washing. Ignaz Semmelweis discovered the importance of that nearly 200 years ago. So you still see people not washing their hands even after using the toilet. I figure if we're still not doing that with hand washing, that we have a ways to go with regard to fit. The truth is, new ideas take time to spread. And actually, I'm surprised by how quickly this idea of feedback-informed care has spread. So every day, hundreds of people visit my website and they access our 2 free tools, a relationship measure called the session rating scale and a progress tool called the outcome rating scale. And these are being used virtually around the world. It's one of 2 or 3 of the most popular ways to track outcomes. So in reality, I think there are many people, but still, as I travel about, there are loads that have not heard about it. And there's a small cluster of people who are not interested in asking clients for feedback. But I would say that that's a relatively small group.
Do you have any figure or idea how much people and what people are using this in Sweden?
I don't have any information really about how many people are using it in Sweden. I can tell you that in Norway, it was approved as an evidence-based practice by the Socialtjänst equivalent, and that it is used in public and private settings around the country. I can also say that the same is true in Norway, that a group that oversees professional practice has approved it, and that it's being taught relatively in a relatively widespread way. So, but Sweden, I don't have a ton of information about.
So Norway, Denmark is ahead of us.
Norway and Denmark, if the question is about implementation of feedback-informed treatment, then it certainly feels that Norway and Denmark are leading the way.
And what about in Europe?
Germany is a country that has widespread use of outcome tools. The United Kingdom, across the various governments that make up that kingdom, are endorsing feedback-informed treatment, using measures on a regular basis. I would say the UK and Germany are both really at the forefront. Some of the most well-known researchers are from those places. And I think the shift that has to take place in terms of attitude and perspective probably stands in many people's way. In the UK, in Germany, the shift towards outcomes and as opposed to simply emphasizing the method of care has been in process for some time now.
That is interesting. I know you were here last week and talking for Socialchefsdagarna. But then I understand you talk more about deliberate practice. Could you see what is the relation between feedback-informed treatment and deliberate practice? What is the connection?
And this is where it comes to my personal journey as a clinician. From the very beginning, I was a younger doctoral student, the youngest one in my program at the time. Many of the people who I went to school with had already been professionals, nurses, master's level counselors or social workers for some time, and then went back to a PhD program. And I have to tell you, impressed by what they knew and by their confidence. By contrast, for me, I was very insecure and started this journey to try to figure out, how could I be more effective? And like many clinicians, I started with treatment models. I even uprooted my entire life from California, nice, sunny, great weather, moved to Milwaukee, cloudy, rainy, cold much of the time.
Just like Sweden.
Just like Sweden in many ways, in order to work intensely with two people who had developed a very specific method of treatment. And what happened is outside researchers came in and found that we were not any more effective than anyone else. So that left me into my quandary again. I felt much more confident after my time at that center, but it seems like that was a chimera. It was a mirage, really. I wasn't any more effective than anyone else. So two former supervisors and professors, Michael Lambert and Lynn Johnson, introduced me to routine outcome measurement. They didn't call it that at the time. Lynn had developed a relationship scale. Michael was using a standardized progress measure. Both of them were lengthy. And the idea was, well, maybe we couldn't figure out exactly the right method everybody should be trained in, or the right method to use with this problem. But you could know if you were helping or not right in the moment. That was a revolutionary idea. And we started doing it. For me, given the clientele that we were working with, which were people often on the margins of society, who frequently struggled with reading or with English as their primary language, and I only had the measures at that time in English. So we developed a very simple version of each of these scales and began administering them, and the rest is history. We administered them to our clients, randomized trials started. We learned a great deal most recently about implementing this, because fit is a great idea until you try to make it work in your agency. And then it's a challenging idea. So Heidi Bratland out of Norway did a study of how long it takes to implement. And then you soon discover, this is a long story, you soon discover that when you're measuring, you don't help everybody. And that was interesting to me. The question now was, what could I do to improve my work with people I didn't connect with or didn't help? Enter deliberate practice. And it just came at the right moment in time. I happened to read an article by one of Sweden's own people, professionals named Anders Ericsson. He was living in South Florida at the time. And he'd been
10,000 hours.
That's what he's best known for, but not because he ever said it, but rather because another popularizer of science, Malcolm Gladwell, said it. Ericsson always maintained that there wasn't any set number of hours. And in fact, as we got better at deliberate practice in particular domains of performance, the amount of time got smaller and smaller. Calculus, for example, was a system of mathematical analysis that took years to learn at one time. Well, what got better? Teaching. Why? Because of deliberate, concentrated practice. And as a result, many high school students become quite proficient at calculus. Same with music. Often took years to master an instrument, but they've gotten better at that. And students can become quite proficient without 10,000 hours. Now, for the finer and higher levels of performance, it may take 20, 30, 50,000 hours of deliberate practice to reach those top levels of performance. But the key for me and for mental health professionals is once you begin measuring, you'll see who you help, but you'll also see there are a whole group of people you don't. And in our field, what have we done? When it doesn't work, we're very well defended as a profession. What do we say? Too ill, too unmotivated, too resistant. We need better treatments. As opposed to asking, what could I learn different? Maybe it's about me. And that's where deliberate practice comes in. And when I was in Gothenburg a week ago, I was so moved by the response of the socialchefsdagarna to the message. We can do better. Now, I just want to be clear. This isn't about a contest. Who's the champion? Who's best? The question is can you be better than you were with your last client? And for me, that's exactly been my mission from the time I was a young graduate student.
And I'm mainly working towards Socialtjänsten in Sverige, different type of social workers. What would you say would be the best arguments to get them to use FIT? What will be the benefits for them? And I'm well aware of what you said in the beginning.
Well, between you and me, I would say very few people are convinced by research. And this is what all of the academics think should convince people. But you just have to look at our response to the pandemic that shows that people aren't convinced by science at all. We're still arguing about it. And in some ways, that's the nature of science. Science isn't so much aimed at here's what the truth is, but let's figure out how best to move forward. And we're going to refine what we know over time. I imagine that will be true of FIT and our understanding of deliberate practice moving forward. So there's an entire process that's been outlined by a psychologist named Dean Fixon about how to implement. And it really starts by percolating curiosity. We have to help people be curious. And in our busy workaday world, very often clinicians are told what to do. Here's what the riktlinjer are, just do it. Well, I think science shows it's not so simple. People often don't do it, or they do it differently than they're told. So in order to get folks interested in, we have to spark their curiosity, and then they need agency and management support to continue their exploration. They need ongoing feedback about their current skill level so that they can highlight the areas where they're not doing as well. And I'm not talking about, and of course, I don't know if this happens in Sweden or not. I can only speak for North America. I'm not talking about a yearly employer-employee review. Those are absolutely worthless. How do we know that? Science. What we need is ongoing feedback that helps us know what skills we possess and refine them. I have to say that 6 or 12 hours of training in a workshop, I don't find a very useful way to transfer knowledge and skills. I think people need ongoing support and contact.
And how do you mean that should be done?
Well, we can inspire them with an hour or two speech, but there needs to be an organized effort at an agency that supports people trying out these ideas. I'll give you one more piece. Very often clinicians are asked and expected to learn new things while also working their full-time job. That's not very fair. So there has to be time set aside for new learning and for trying things out. There has to be an observable culture. In other words, you have to be able to see people. If we're all going in our offices and closing the doors so that no one can see our work, well, we're not going to achieve the kind of implementation that we want. There has to be a good communication plan at the agency. So there, believe it or not, is a fair bit of science, both established and emerging science, around how to implement. And I haven't found clinicians hard to inspire or spark their curiosity. The challenge is, after a presentation, they go back to work and nothing changes. It's just like a client who goes to a residential treatment center for 6 weeks and then goes right back to the same environment they were in when they were misusing drugs or alcohol. The risks are substantial that they will relapse. Is that surprising to people? And by the way, we can't just say, well, that's the beguiling nature of alcohol and drug addiction. No, no, no. It's the absence of a supportive culture.
Well, that is interesting. That takes me into a subject I was asked about. A friend of mine, social worker, heavy workload, crazy hours, and at the moment, no time or no money is allowed to spend on anything that, no training, almost no supervision. He just works with clients and that's all they can do. And he said, deliberate practice. I'm interested in survival practice.
Yeah.
How can we do to get people to take the time or get the time? Because in Sweden, the reality is I'm called, I train in an agency, 2-3 days, and then I'm gone and nothing changed. And 2 years later, I'm called into the same agency doing the same training.
Yeah, pretty discouraging.
Yeah.
I'll bet you always have fun, and I'll bet the staff enjoys the 2 or 3 days off in a way in order to attend the training, and I'm sure they enjoy and appreciate what you've done and taught them. But there's no real opportunity for learning. Learning involves practical application and discussion amongst colleagues. And if management doesn't set aside the time for that, implementation fails almost all the time. Again, how do we know that? Science. So, in this era of listen to the science, why aren't we doing that? And you can go ahead and continue the way you're doing. But if the clinician is saying to me, I'm interested in survival practice, I know that burnout rates will be quite high. And here's an interesting part about FIT. In agencies where FIT is implemented, burnout rates, sick leave rates drop. So do turnover rates. So if you're working in a Swedish agency that frequently employs students just out of school, something like social welfare for kids, where their turnover rate in 2 years is astonishing, well, we have, again, studies showing that when FIT is implemented, those people stay in their jobs. Why? Because it's awful to be what clinicians rather need to feel helpful. That's why most get into this field, not because it's the biggest paying field in healthcare services, but because they liked people. And so if your colleague is describing his life as survival practice, you can only tread water for so long.
That is true. Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else I should be asking you? Any important stuff we didn't cover today?
Well, on the risk of being controversial, I would say that our field in particular is trying to have better outcomes. but approaching it, at least in my view of the research, in entirely the wrong way. We focus on methods for diagnoses when there's very little evidence. What you show me, the evidence that training in this method produces better outcomes or lower burnout rates. You show me. We do have evidence of that in FIT. Secondly, we continue to employ training models that everyone knows don't work. So sending people to workshops out of the office or even inviting somebody in for a couple of days. These are very entertaining and can be fun and can be a respite. It's like a 2-day long fika. But they don't work.
Fika is good.
Yeah, Swedish fika is good. But they don't work. And we've known that. And somebody has to have the will to say so. So my thought is that this is an issue at a larger level. And everybody points to that level and says, until they say that we can do this, until we get support for it, we will continue the way we have continued now for decades. It's really quite astonishing. And I will say, I am not saying don't learn a method. What I'm saying is that's not the best way to improve your results.
So have treatment lost its magic?
No, I think for the first time in history, at least in North America and many countries, people are reaching out for psychological services in a major way, like they've never done before. 5 years ago, I gave a speech lamenting just how few people were seeking out services. Well, the pandemic has really given us an opportunity in multiple ways. It's opened people's eyes to seeking external support. In North America, the availability of teletherapy, talking like we are on a Zoom conversation, has made accessibility much better. You don't have to, in my town of Chicago, spend 30 minutes driving into town, pay $20 to $30 to park your car to have an hour appointment, and then 30 to 40 minutes back. You can call your therapist just like this. But if we continue with much of the same, rediscovering some new mental health problem, whatever it might be, and some new treatment, and expecting everybody to learn it and hoping they will, without measuring their results, I think we'll be in much the same place we have been for the last 30 or 40 years, which is basically no improvement in treatment outcome.
So before we end, any final words to the social workers of Sweden?
I'm sure that the Swedish population is grateful most of the time for the work they do. Let's give them the tools that they need to not only succeed and survive, but to thrive and get better.
Thank you, Scott. And